Welcome back for the first show of season 2 of the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success podcast. Amy, are you ready for another season?
Totally ready.
You know what's so funny is that when we started this podcast in February, just before everything kind of got super crazy, neither of us really knew that we were gonna, frankly, because podcast is a lot of work. I saw this meme the other day that said everybody can have a podcast, but just because you can doesn't mean that you should, right?
Very true.
But we love it, and we've been doing this now for a year, going on a year, and it's just such a fun outlet for all the information that we have in our collective brains about things that we see and new trends that are happening and all kinds of really cool things that are going on in the industry. And this year, we thought that actually Amy came up with this idea. So full credit goes to my fabulous co-host. She said we should have a theme for this year's podcast. And the theme is to rise above the noise. And Amy, you and I, you kind of had that sort of epiphany over the break, the Christmas bubble, as we call it, when we all kind of take some time off over the holidays. And it was mostly about just how unbelievably cluttered Amazon was that kind of sparked this, right?
Yes, absolutely. We've shared this before. We're not shy about the fact that a lot of our initial author inquiries that we get, I start going through them first, try to get a feel for their platform, other books that they've released, things like that, their website. And this is an honest example. It happened. I even texted Benny as it was happening. But I was reading an author's message to us, doing my thing, and I clicked through to check out their book on Amazon. I always do that as well. And my immediate response was like, okay, this cover is, I don't fully get it yet, but let me check out the description. And the description was one of those, we talk about this all the time, one big block of text. And so I was already kind of getting foggy-eyed, and I kid you not, down there in the little also bought section was just this amazing book cover. Like, it just immediately caught my attention. And before you know it, I was over on that Amazon book page and I was checking it out. Honestly, it started out of professional curiosity, but I went in and actually bought the book after work. And I was like, Penny, I bought a book. But it may sound terrible as you're listening, but this is real life. I was a real shopper in that moment. And I was actually more dedicated to figuring out what this book was about, that, the author that came to us, like, I have a real reason to do my best and try to sit there and see what we can do for them. And I was still distracted by this great cover. And then I jumped over to their product page. And so that is just a really honest version of what so many shoppers are experiencing on Amazon now.
Yeah. And that's first off, that's an author's worst nightmare, right? That you go to their page and you find something else like, whoa, this just looks better. It's like, oh no, please don't say that. But you really only get one chance. And it baffles me how many authors go into this. And we talked about this before. Amy and I talked about the fact that we're always very honest in these shows, but this season we're really ripping off the Band-Aid. I guess for lack of a better term, right? Just because it still baffles me how many authors don't understand that you are literally asking for people's time. In a world that does nothing else really but ask for our time and try to distract us from the things that we should be doing, you are asking for people's time. So the first podcast, and you don't have to necessarily listen to these in order. We'd love if you do, but obviously you can skip around to some different things that we're going to talk about, and hopefully we'll have some time to highlight that before the end of the show. But this first podcast is really designed for any author. So whether you have books out there and you feel like, I don't really know I don't really know why I'm not selling books, or you are about to publish, this episode is absolutely for you. And I am so excited for this new season.
I am too. I'm very excited about this next level honesty. And I really think don't be scared. I think it's really going to help people even more because, if we're being honest, there's a lot of info out there for authors, a lot of advice, a lot of tips. And I really do think it's time that they just get some really honest, straightforward, this is what's working, this is what's not, and let's just give them a real straightforward path to start following. It's a lot to filter through.
Yeah, and with marketing, and you pointed that out too. I mean, marketing is a lot to unpack, right? And I think that I don't want people to listen to this and go, well, so were you lying to us in season 1? No, but there are different levels of honesty, and I think that where Amy and I really got to over the break was, the folks who listen to us, because I've gotten some emails and I've talked to some authors about working with us who said, oh my gosh, I listen to your podcast, I love it. You all really deserve to know kind of the like to lift the curtain, so to speak, to look at the who's behind the curtain, to kind of look at the things that we see all the time and the stuff that I can almost guarantee you is going to really hurt your success. And you may as well just take the money that you were going to invest in marketing and your time and throw it over the neighbor's fence and let somebody use it properly. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're going to so here's the other thing. So I'm literally in the middle of judging the Ben Franklin Awards for IBPA. And they're some of the most prestigious awards in the industry. And I love them. I don't usually get a chance. I mean, the last time that I judged for them was a few years ago, just because it's I don't have that kind of time and I really want to spend the time with these books. But I said to this year, yeah, absolutely. And I chose the heaviest category because it's a particular favorite genre of mine. And there's also a lot of competition for it. And the category, I may as well just say it, is the business category, right? But I'm amazed. Business is, Amy and I have talked about this a lot. Business, I mean, there are a lot of very busy genres, but business is busy for different reasons because sometimes a lot of books tend to fall into business kind of by default. And I'm seeing that in this judging, right? And I'm also amazed at the things that authors miss because the Benjamin Franklin, I mean, any contest has an entry fee, a fee to enter the contest, and they're generally not inexpensive, but obviously, if you win or you get an honorable mention or something, I mean, that's a very impressive nod and it's great to put up on your book and your Amazon book page, etc. So I'm only a quarter of the way through these books and I've already found 3 books that are in the wrong category. So they literally paid money to be part of this contest and their books are sitting in the wrong category. And I'm literally just blown away.
I can't believe that when you told me that. It's really tragic, but it's sadly, it's all too common. And it's amazing how much hard work, how much hard work these authors put into getting this book produced, and how a seemingly straightforward decision like choosing your genre, choosing what category you're going to be in. And if you get that wrong, how derailed you can get quickly, and how much time and effort you can waste on trying to support something that's not accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And this is why we thought that we would start the first show with finding your lane. Finding your genre is incredibly important. And it's interesting. It's a lot of times it's the last thing that authors kind of talk about, right? Is what genre I'm going to write in. I mean, sometimes, some authors just know, and some authors just sit down and start writing their book, and then figure out the genre later, which is a huge mistake. Sitting down to write a book and not knowing your genre, it is, if you feel like you've been there and you don't know what genre you're in, or you're in a genre that doesn't exist, or you're straddling a couple of different genres and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds like me. Hopefully, we hope that this show really helps you, because that's a big problem. I mean, it's a big, big, big problem. The other piece of this is also being a fan of your genre, right? So I cannot tell you how many times that I've spoken with authors who don't read in their genre, which literally blows me away, right? And then there are authors that say, well, that's all I read, and those are folks who I know are going to be successful. I mean, you really have to immerse yourself in your genre and be a fan of it first and foremost.
Right. I absolutely agree. And this is not one of those things that there's no trick or, Cliff Notes version for this, Penny. It's not something you can skip. I think if you really aren't a fan and you're not reading in your genre, it really doesn't make a lot of sense for you to try to write for those readers. And, I came across this the other day and it just kind of blew my mind because I didn't realize how extensive it was, but I was doing some SEO research and I found out that a lot of readers, a lot of Googlers are searching for Goodreads along with the genre they're most interested in. So Goodreads, cozy mystery, Goodreads, psychological suspense. Like these are a couple examples. Those search terms are really high. People are doing that a lot. And what that tells me is that readers care about genres. Like you mentioned already, Penny, people don't have a lot of time to waste. They want to get right to the stuff that they know they're realistically going to like and want to buy and start reading. So as an author, you need to also be in that headspace where you're not wasting people's time either. And I think this straddling of genres, being unsure, being vague, it's a waste of your time and it's a waste of their time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there are no exceptions to this rule. There are absolutely no exceptions to this rule in terms of you got to find your genre. I taught a class a few weeks ago, and there was an author, and she said, I'd love to get in touch with you after the class and talk to you just about some of the stuff that I'm doing. And I've asked her, Amy, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to run this by you yet, but
exciting.
her note back to me was so impressive that I've asked her to see if she could be on the show, because I think it would be kind of fun to just talk to somebody who's really in the trenches with this and some of the ideas that she came up with and whatnot. But one of the things that really sort of sparked me about my conversation with her is that she releases a book, I want to say every 10 weeks. And that's a pretty hefty schedule, right? But she told me about how, now her books launch and they do really well, and she's self-published and they get quite a bit of momentum. They get quite a bit of traction from launch date. But she said, it wasn't always the case. But one thing that she was so clear on is that she listens to her market, right? So she has great covers. She has a great website. And she knows her genre, right? But she also listens to her readers. And part of finding your lane, part of finding your genre is listening to what your readers want. Because again, as Amy pointed out, you really don't want to waste people's time, because people get upset about that when they pick up a book and they're like, what is this mess? It's full of typos. I actually think that readers get more upset over a book that is poorly written or not right for the genre or something that they weren't expecting, rather than the money that they spent on the book. And I've seen this evidenced in reviews. But she absolutely, she absolutely understood her genre and knew the various particulars of what the genre demands, and she adhered to that.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. I loved reading her initial email, and that would be so great if she joined us, because, it reminds me, this is another great opportunity to talk about, Penny, you mentioned this episode isn't just for people that haven't released yet, because the beauty of being an author is that you really do get to start with a clean slate with each new release. You can do things better. And this just reminds me that you need to change up a little bit how you look at developing your brand. And we get a lot of authors that come to us saying, their sister or their best friend or their neighbor really liked the book, and that's what's fueling them. And they're like, I feel good about this. Let's go full bore. Let's start marketing this sucker. And and every time I see that, I'm always like, okay, hold on. Like, I don't want to, dim that light, but that kind of positive feedback needs to come with a grain of salt, and you can't just stop there, because I don't think any author gets 100% positive feedback on their initial pass at a book. So I think you need to always remember to keep pushing yourself, and your personal network's good, but go beyond that and try to get more diverse and constructive feedback during your development process, and take what what readers are saying about other books that you're in the genre you want to write in. Like, definitely look into other reviews, positive, negative. You can learn a lot from those as well. But this is just a moment where I'm like, don't get trapped in that idea that, oh, so-and-so said my book was amazing, I'm good. It's like, your readers are the people that are really fans of your genres are the ones that matter most. So you really have to take that full scope of potential feedback into consideration and not put those blinders on because you got one or two, positive responses from people that know you personally. I think that's a very scary trap to fall into. So they read it, they love you, they love your book, you think you're good. And I think, Penny, we see a lot of people that come to us that are kind of writing genres or trying to make up their own genre.
Oh, yeah.
Based on positive feedback they've had from people that are close to them.
Yeah.
And that's also a very dangerous space to get into, and in a dangerous path to start going down when you want to get serious about selling books and finding readers.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And to your point about getting feedback, I mean, honestly, I have a relationship with my editor, my content editor, where, she sends me my book. And if I'm not cussing at some of her edits at some point and looking at the book and thinking, I'm not dealing with this crap right now, what the hell she said, what blah, blah, blah. Like, if I'm not getting really pissed off, then she hasn't done her job. Right. So if you feel like you've launched your book and your book hasn't been through, like, at some point, if somebody hasn't given you some kind of feedback to make the book better, then you may want to seek out some of that feedback, because I hear that a lot too when I get on the phone sometimes with folks. They say, well, I have a bunch of friends and they really like the book. Well, of course they do, because they're going to want to come over to your house. Well, I don't know if people can go over to people's house. I guess it depends on the state, whether or not you can go back to people's houses.
They want to be invited back, right?
Right. You know what I mean? Like, you want to get invited back for whatever, when stuff starts opening up again or whatever, you know what I mean? So I just be careful with that. And Amy, you see a lot of authors with books that are so close, but just aren't quite right. So I want to kind of segue and offer some tips for folks who are listening, thinking, this feels like my problem. Like, how can I fix this? My book is out there. Or for a new author thinking, well, I don't want to be in the wrong lane, or I've had all my friends say they like my book and now I'm afraid to publish my book. Like, we don't necessarily want you to not publish. Like, that's the beauty of this industry, right? Is that anybody can publish a book. Just make sure that you're getting some really, really critical feedback by people who don't really have anything to gain from, from your book. So Amy, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but talk to me a little bit about some examples that we can offer folks.
Right. No, it's very true. We don't want people to shy away from publishing that book, but part of this whole like next level honesty is that we genuinely want to see a more savvy self-published author out there, especially. There are just some of these things that you really have to know and understand and get down before you take that next step. It all adds up. Penny, you say that all the time, everything matters. And so, we've already mentioned about how important it is to start with the right genre, a genre that, and being a real fan and taking those steps to actually understand who these readers are and what's out there and what people are saying. Like, what do readers of that genre like? What do they not like right now? You had that great example of the author who's paying attention to her reader feedback. Every time she goes to release a new title, she's built an amazing platform on constantly improving on, her last release. And what all that is real. It's real work, and it's tangible proof that you're on the right track. And I think that's what a lot of authors need to focus on more. So we know that it's very common and kind of a standard practice to have this ideal reader in your mind. Like, this is the person that I want reading my book. This is what makes me feel good about what I'm doing, about the time I've spent. And that's part of the fun in this kind of crazy journey that you're on. But the reality is that you can't base your brand and your marketing around this made up ideal reader. You really do have to buckle down and follow the rules of the market and pay close attention to how real readers are operating, what kind of books they're buying, what they're saying in their not so great reviews. Again, going back to that, there's a lot of evidence out there. And so find some more tangible evidence about what you should be doing with your book to start leading you down that right path.
Right, exactly. And I think that it's also, we're talking about getting to know your market, and I appreciate the fact that it does take time. But I think that one of the best ways to get to know your market, first off, whether you have published and you think, oh, I'm down the wrong path, or you're getting ready to hit publish on a book, is read in your genre. Right. So read books that are in your, and if you, and the thing about it is too, is that if you read books that are in your genre, all of a sudden you're going to be like, either you're going to say, oh, this is exactly what I've written, or you're going to go, oops, this is not at all my genre. Right. So read, and also read through some of the reviews, as Amy talked about. The other thing to know is that it's really rare for, I would say any author. I know in our notes, Amy, you and I talked back and forth about that. And I said that it was rare for an indie author to get it exactly right the first time. But I think really for any author, like I had an author tell me the other day, she goes, your first book is kind of therapy. And I get that sort of to a point. I think this is especially true if it's memoir or something like that. But I think that, sometimes your first book is sort of dipping your toe in the water. So not that this is permission to put out a book that isn't exactly where you need it to be, but understand that sometimes you can go back and reissue your first book. If you're listening to this again and you think, oh my gosh, this book came out a couple of years ago and now I know what's wrong, or I've done some exploring, you can reissue that book. But I think that if you're listening to this and you haven't launched anything, start buying books in your genre, start reading in your genre, start following other authors in your genre, see what they're doing. And you will quickly understand what A, you need to do, or B, if you're in the wrong marketplace. But if you don't identify your genre, first and foremost, absolutely nothing else matters. Because the genre is, if we're talking about this like a tree, let's say, right? The genre is the tree trunk from which everything else sprouts, right? So your book cover has to be genre specific. The bloggers that you're going to go after for reviews, or the readers that you're going to go after for reviews, are all very genre specific, but you must understand and identify your genre first.
That's absolutely true. And we get a lot of people, I know, Penny, you've mentioned before, when you get off calls with authors that say, or when you and I chat after the fact and we start talking about like, okay, can we develop, a marketing proposal for this person? How would we work with them? And we start having those conversations. And it just always blows my mind when you say they're not sure what genre they're in, or they gave me like 5 or 6 different options.
Right.
And then that's kind of where they leave it. And that just blows my mind, because back to what, you were saying about your editor, my alarm bells start going off, because at first I'm thinking like, what did their editor say about this? How did they find that editor in the first place? Actually, take it even back a step. Like, how did you find the right editor if you don't know who you're writing for? Because a lot of editors specialize in certain genres. And again, like, how are you ready to spend money promoting your book to people that may or may not exist?
Right.
This hybrid idealized reader that kind of likes this genre, but also kind of likes this genre and is open to something entirely different with, these underlining, political statement. It's like, whoa, what is happening here? And I think that does go back to the author you chatted with that said your first book is kind of like therapy. Because I think you see a lot of that in a first book where it's like, I have all these ideas and things I want to accomplish. Let's pack it in. And then this is going to be my, big debut to the world. And it oftentimes, more often than not, doesn't go as they planned.
Well, and part of the issue with self-publishing, and look, I teach self-publishing, I love self-publishing, but when you have a low barrier to entry, you're going to get folks who, you and I can have a separate podcast conversation about some of the emails that you get, but I would just like to call out one that we got this morning, where in the subject line, it said, need more book sales, right? I need an actual date before 2021 is over. Like, we all need stuff, right? Like, right. I need things too, buddy. I don't know what to tell you.
I would like to talk to an author that doesn't need book sales.
Right. Right. We all want book sales. The challenge is that it just starts so much earlier. And when you have such a low barrier to entry, it's easy to get so far down the road and all this appealing stuff and like, oh my God, this is great. And then you publish a book and literally nobody shows up to your party. Amy, I think I mentioned to you that I sometimes talk to people who say, can I send you a part of my book and you can tell me what genre I'm in? Like, I am the last person you should be asking about what, we know our marketing stuff but
right.
That's your editor's job, right?
Right. You've gotten way too far with this craziness.
I know it. I
know. Somebody should have had that talk with them long before they're getting ready to write a check for marketing and promotion. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I think that's part of the reason that we wanted to run this series of podcasts, is because it's so upsetting to me that people let authors kind of run down this merry path and nobody stops them to say, this is really not in your best interest, right?
Drives me nuts.
Yeah, it just drives me nuts. So if somebody's listening and thinking, my book is really problematic, can it be saved? And I was thinking, Amy, we should do a whole show on, can my book be saved? Or maybe have that kind of as a tag, as a little 5 minutes at the end of the show, because I think that a lot of folks are out there wondering the same thing. And, lagging book sales, back to the book sale conversation, can mean a lot of things. It could be that, that you're in the wrong genre. It could be that the cover is bad. The author not knowing the genre. So spending time really doing your research, maybe talking to other authors, attending live or virtual events in your genre can really, really help unearth some fixes that could potentially help you. And in some cases, it could just be changing up your cover. I cannot tell you how many times that I have sat with authors who are absolutely wrote for their genre, and for whatever reason, their cover is just not right. I was going to use the word a mess, but we'll just take that for another time.
No, it's true. We had an author reach out to us recently, and he actually published, I want to say he's got 5 books, I believe, that are all releasing in Q1 of this year. And there was zero sense of branding. I couldn't tell whether they were fiction or nonfiction. It was amazing. But I'm so glad you mentioned covers, because the reality is, too many authors get, and I will say I mentioned his covers and we did not hear back from him. So this is my lead in. Too many authors get way too attached to their covers. And I would just ask everybody to leave that in the disaster that was 2020, standing up for your crappy covers, it's your kid sister on the playground. Let's not do that anymore. All right. If you're going to make it as an author and you want to sell books and you want to keep going with this, you need to be willing to admit that you may not know it all, but you're determined to figure it out. And a lot of times it's as simple as taking some feedback from somebody that understands your market better and channeling that into a cover that really works to draw people in.
Right.
Because there's really no excuse for that anymore. And, I say that to authors that reach out. I will send them a link to the bestseller list for a category that I think they should be competing in, just to give them an idea of, these are the books that people are drawn to right now, and do a hard look between your cover and these covers. And honestly, tell me if you think you could all be sitting on the same bookshelf. And
Yeah.
when an author comes back and says, my cover's amazing, I don't know what you're talking about, it's like, okay, then we can't help you if you already want to throw that roadblock up,
Right, exactly. Because that's another thing too. And I don't mean to I'm not trying to kill off our business, Amy, but if the odds are against you, so if you have a bad cover, if you're in a wrong genre, there is not a single marketing and publicity firm out there that can fix that for you. Right. So you have to, at the end of the day, your book becomes its own roadblock to success. Right. So, when you're sitting in, and I love, Amy, that you pointed out about the bestseller list, because I think that's it's a very visual way to say, does my book really belong here? And you have to be willing to have that honest conversation with yourself, right?
I agree. And not to interrupt, Penny, but it really bothers me too. And again, like you said, we don't want to scare people away. We're not actually mean, but I will say
we are.
No, we try to be really productive, because slight vent moment here, we get authors that come to us that have worked with small publishing houses and things like that have outrageously disastrous covers, and I can't tell you how mad it makes me.
Yeah.
That in theory these authors were being guided by people who claim to know what they're doing, and then they come to us and here's my book, it's out, it's on Amazon, check it out, can you help me? And I'm thinking, who are these people that helped you make this book?
Yeah.
And that let this happen? It honestly upsets me that there are so many people out there willing to just give authors a smile and be like, sure, just, sign that check. We'll help you do anything. It's It's maddening to me.
I know it. And I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because I think that it's worth mentioning if you're working with a publisher, if you're working with, and we'll have a podcast separately to kind of break down publishing houses, and I will be beating my head against the wall a lot during that show. So we're going to because this just makes me absolutely crazy. If you have a boutique publisher or a publisher or whatever, so anybody who knows me knows I'm a control freak. I prefer control enthusiast, but it is what it is. Even if back when CreateSpace was, in business, and I would, or whatever publishing, assistant company that was out there to help you get the book up on Amazon, I was always designing my own covers because I wanted that measure of control. And I'm not suggesting that you necessarily do that, especially if you paid. I talked to an author last week who paid a bunch of money to publish with a company, and they're giving her all kinds of trouble and all this other stuff, which is why we have to do a show on this. But they may be designing a cover for you. Don't just take what they have given you and assume that it is right. Some of these places have fabulous cover designers, but some of them outsource their covers to places like Fiverr, which there's nothing wrong with Fiverr. We get our podcast. We have a great guy on Fiverr who does our podcast editing, and it's fabulous, but I'm not a fan necessarily for covers. Now, some of you listening may prove me wrong and say, my cover was designed on Fiverr and it was great. And maybe you got lucky, but you really want to make sure that they're doing a good cover for you. I'm sorry, I know this wasn't really a conversation about covers, because that's a separate podcast, but I'll tell you something. The gateway drug to getting people to buy your book is your cover. I mean, that is absolutely true. So
understanding your genre, you are 100% correct though, because they are totally linked, because your cover person should be familiar with your genre as well. And so not knowing your genre, that's automatically throwing you in left field, continue. Yeah. Sorry. I think you're totally correct to make such a bold statement about how much the cover and the genre is linked.
Right. Exactly. And I think that, Amy, back to your point, going through the bestseller list on Amazon is really a great way to see what other books, what are the elements, what are the things that you like, what are the things that you don't like, what are the elements that need to be part of that cover, and and what is going to make your book look like it should be on the bookshelf, next to the other titles that are sitting on this bestseller list. I think that we all, as authors, we all love our books, right? And it's important because books have a big ask, right? They ask us for a lot of our time and a lot of our attention, but you can't, don't fall prey to the whole Love is Blind thing where you're all of a sudden, you're publishing a book and you think everybody's going to love this book, because that may not be true. And
No. Your book doesn't have a good personality as far as they know.
Right. I think that's fabulous. The final thing that I wanted to mention too is genre straddling. So some books can have secondary genres, right? And we see books that often do have secondary genres. This falls in the nonfiction category a lot more than it does fiction. But secondary genres and genre straddling is really tough. And it's not necessarily something that you can bank on for book sales.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because we get that a lot when it comes to marketing a book too, and we have to be really strategic, not just about where the client's best options are, but considering their budget, their current platform, what are they going to be able to support on their own, once we're not working together anymore or in between releases and we work together again. So I think that's really important, because if you have to figure, Penny, if it takes an author 5 to 10 minutes on the phone with you to explain what their book is about and who it's relevant to, then there's no way that that is going to translate onto the product page on Amazon, So if they can't make their book sound extremely appealing to the right people in less than 30 seconds, like on a phone call, like do that as a challenge to yourself, then you have more work to do, plain and simple.
Yeah.
This is another one. There's no shortcuts. There's no tricks around this. Like if you can't get on the phone with somebody and make them super jazzed about your book in less than 30 seconds, keep doing the work.
Yeah.
Or have somebody help you do the work and get some good feedback. We've chatted about how important that is, getting that outside constructive feedback.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is really, and we're going to do a show on elevator pitches. It's a little bit tricky to do because an elevator pitch, it's fun if we have some examples. So we may do a call for examples in an upcoming show on that, just because it's kind of interesting when you can take something that feels like it's sort of a jumbled mess and turn it into a 30-second elevator pitch that really entices people and gets them to ask for more. But at the end of the day, Amy, you really address something. If you can't explain what your book is about very succinctly and to the exact, and something that really makes people want to read more. And you and I see this too when authors contact us. Like there are some emails that we get that I think, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to this author today. And then there are other ones where I'm like, I still don't really know what this book is about. And in those cases, I can almost guarantee you that I could spend 30 minutes on the phone with an author and I could come off of that call and still have absolutely no idea what the book is about, even though I've asked all the right questions. So get clarity on your book. Start to work on that 30-second pitch, even though we haven't done the elevator pitch podcast per se. We have a blog post. I think it's a little bit older, but it's still relevant on the AME blog that you can research in terms of getting some succinct, information down, and then just take a look through that bestseller list. And we'd love to know what you think. Our contact information is in the podcast show notes. And I just want to mention finally, Amy, there's some big industry news that happened, I think over the break, is that Book Expo America, which we've been to a few times, is pretty much no more. Like they are quote unquote reinventing themselves. And I think that's big. That's a big deal.
That is crazy. I can't believe it. Such a big event.
It's a big event, but it's also I think it's really indicative of how publishing is changing. I mean, I think that there was a time when that is where fall titles. So the book expo was always in May, just after Memorial Day. That is where fall titles were presented, so to speak. But publishing schedules have changed. Fall is still a big season, but it is not always the biggest season, right? And I think that, attendance has been down for the last few years, and the pandemic just really, they kind of looked at that and said, we need to offer something more better. And I'm hoping that what they do is they turn this into an educational model, because there is as many conferences as I teach, there still isn't enough education out there for authors, in my opinion. I think there needs to be more opportunities for authors to really just spend time and listen and learn, because that's really the only way that you're going to grow. So I know this has been a longer than normal episode. I can already tell just looking at the time. I want to thank you all so much for listening. A reminder, please review the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and list one takeaway that you learned in the show that you're going to implement today. Not only is it helpful for other people reading your review, but it's also helpful for you as somebody who's, what your takeaway is. You'll remember it and you'll be able to implement it a lot quicker. This is Amy Cornell and Penny Sansevieri, and this is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast, Season 2, Show 1. We're so excited. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.